The mashed potatoes felt like sawdust in my mouth as my mother Patricia looked directly at me across our Thanksgiving table and spoke the words that would change everything forever. Alina, you need to understand that Sarah's family will always come first in our decisions. She has children responsibilities. You're always going to be last. My father Robert nodded slowly, cutting his turkey with deliberate precision. Your mother's right. Sarah needs more help. 29 years of subtle hints and quiet favoritism suddenly crystallized into this moment of brutal honesty. I set down my fork, feeling something fundamental shift inside my chest. My voice came out steady, almost conversational. Good to know where I stand. I'll definitely remember this. They continued eating as if nothing monumental had just occurred, completely unaware they had just lost me forever. Driving home that night, I didn't cry. Instead, memories flooded back with startling clarity, each one now making perfect sense in this new context of spoken truth. I was 7 years old when Sarah got the bigger bedroom with the bay window overlooking our backyard garden. She's older, she needs more space, Mom had explained while I moved my stuffed animals into the smaller room facing the alley. When I turned 13 and asked about switching rooms since Sarah had left for college, Dad just shrugged. She'll need somewhere to stay when she visits. High school brought more revelations. Sarah received a brand new Honda Civic for her 16th birthday, complete with custom seat covers and a sound system. When my 16th birthday arrived, I got driving lessons and permission to share Dad's old pickup truck on weekends. Building character, they called it. Sarah's cheerleading uniforms, competition fees, and summer camps were funded without question. When I wanted to join the debate team, Mom handed me a job application for the local grocery store. If it's important to you, you'll find a way to make it happen. College applications revealed the full scope of their financial priorities. Sarah's Heike prep courses, college counselor sessions, and application fees totaled nearly $3,000. I filled out my own applications at the kitchen table using fee waivers and studying from library books. When Sarah struggled with her freshman year workload, they hired a tutor. When I made Dean's List every semester while working 20 hours a week in the campus dining hall, I got a brief, "That's nice, honey," over Sunday dinner. Sarah's wedding planning consumed 18 months of family conversations and $25,000 of parental contributions. The venue, the dress, the photographer, the reception hall at the country club where Mom had dreamed of hosting such an event. When I casually mentioned hoping for a small wedding someday, Mom's response was immediate. Well, we'll see what we can manage when the time comes. After Sarah married Brandon, the financial support shifted into a different gear entirely. They bought the down payment for Sarah's first house, explaining that young families needed help getting established. They co-signed Brandon's car loan when his credit proved insufficient. Monthly grocery runs became routine with Mom arriving at Sarah's house with bags of supplies. Just helping out with the little ones, she'd explain when I noticed the pattern. Meanwhile, my achievements seemed to exist in a parallel universe. My nursing degree earned while working full-time and taking evening classes merited a congratulatory dinner at a chain restaurant. My promotion to head nurse at the regional medical center was acknowledged with a card. When I bought my own condo using savings accumulated over 5 years of careful budgeting, Dad's only comment was about property taxes being a waste of money. Sarah's part-time job at an upscale boutique was consistently praised as creative and fulfilling work. My career managing critical care patients, developing training protocols, and mentoring new nurses was met with vague statements about helping people being nice. The contrast was so stark it might have been comical if it weren't my life. Holiday hosting duties somehow always defaulted to me despite my smaller living space and work schedule. Sarah has the children to think about, Mom would explain when assigning Christmas dinner preparations. Besides, you're so organized with these things. What she really meant was that I was the one willing to spend my own money and vacation days to make holidays happen, while Sarah showed up with a store-bought dessert and complaints about being tired. Babysitting expectations had evolved into an assumed responsibility. Weekend plans were regularly interrupted by urgent calls about Sarah needing someone to watch Emma and Jake while she and Brandon attended social events or dealt with mysterious errands that couldn't include children. Payment was never discussed because family helps family, and you love spending time with your niece and nephew. The financial web became clearer as I analyzed years of observations. Every time I handled a family obligation, it freed Sarah from responsibility. Every holiday I hosted saved her money and effort. Every babysitting session enabled her social life while she built her reputation as a devoted mother who deserved continued support. But the most painful revelation was recognizing how systematically my own needs had been minimized. When I mentioned feeling overwhelmed at work, the response was advice to manage my stress better. When Sarah complained about the challenges of part-time employment, it became a family crisis requiring intervention. My problems were character-building opportunities. Hers were emergencies demanding immediate attention and financial solutions. Sitting in my car outside my condo, I finally understood the complete architecture of our family dynamics. I hadn't been overlooked or forgotten. I had been deliberately positioned as the support system for Sarah's lifestyle, the backup plan for their emergencies, a reliable one who would sacrifice her own needs for the family's convenience. That realization didn't bring tears. It brought something much more powerful, absolute clarity about what had to change. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Instead of dwelling on hurt feelings or planning emotional confrontations, I approached my situation like a business problem requiring systematic solutions. My first stop was the bank, where I opened a completely separate savings account at a different institution. The account had no connection to my existing finances, no shared beneficiaries, no way for my family to accidentally discover its existence. I redirected my direct deposit to split between my regular checking and this new account, immediately increasing my monthly savings by 40%. Next came the administrative changes. I updated my emergency contacts at work, removing my parents and listing my friend Jennifer from college instead. My insurance beneficiaries were modified to exclude family members, designating the American Cancer Society and local animal shelter as recipients instead. Medical directives were updated with clear instructions that my parents should not be contacted about health decisions. The key situation required delicate handling. I waited until a weekend when I knew they'd be out. Grocery shopping for Sarah's family, then drove to their house and retrieved my spare key from under their garden gnome. They'd had access to my living space for emergencies, but emergencies seemed to occur whenever they needed someone to wait for repair services or accept deliveries while everyone else was busy. Investment statements and financial documents were redirected to my work address. The less they knew about my actual financial situation, the better positioned I'd be to maintain the boundaries I was establishing. My retirement contributions increased substantially, knowing that every dollar invested was a dollar that couldn't be claimed for family emergencies. Communication boundaries proved more challenging to implement subtly. I stopped answering calls immediately, letting voicemail capture messages before deciding which ones merited responses. Family dinner invitations were declined with polite but vague excuses about work obligations and personal commitments. The key was maintaining pleasantness while creating distance. Holiday planning became my first major test of resolve. Instead of automatically volunteering to host Christmas dinner, I booked a 7-day cruise departing December 23rd. The announcement was made casually during a brief phone call with Mom, framed as a gift to myself after a challenging year at work. "But what about Christmas dinner?" Mom asked, her voice carrying genuine confusion. I'm sure Sarah would love to host this year. She has such a beautiful dining room," I replied cheerfully. "I'll send gifts for the children before I leave." The silence that followed was instructive. They'd assumed my availability without ever actually asking for my preference or contribution. Work became my refuge and focus in ways it hadn't been before. I volunteered for additional shifts during holiday weekends, knowing the overtime pay would fund my new independent lifestyle. Professional development courses that I'd previously skipped due to family obligations suddenly became priorities. When the regional medical center posted supervisor openings in other cities, I submitted applications without mentioning the possibility to anyone. My personal life, neglected for years while I managed family responsibilities, slowly began to revive. Jennifer, who'd stayed in touch despite my years of canceled plans and family-related excuses, welcomed me back into her social circle with understanding and encouragement. The book club I'd meant to join for 3 years finally got a new member. Dating, which I'd avoided because family demands consumed my free time, became a possibility worth exploring. Marcus, a fellow nurse from the cardiac unit, had asked me out twice over the past year. Both times I declined due to family babysitting commitments. When he mentioned a new restaurant opening downtown, I surprised him by accepting immediately. The evening was revelatory, not because of romance, but because I remembered what it felt like to make plans without checking everyone else's schedule first. The first real test of my new boundaries came when Mom called requesting emergency babysitting for Emma and Jake. Sarah and Brandon had apparently won a weekend getaway to some resort through Brandon's work, and they needed someone to watch the children on short notice. "I'm not available this weekend," I said simply. "What do you mean you're not available?" "You don't have plans on weekends," Mom replied, her tone suggesting I'd made an obvious mistake. "I do have plans, actually. There are several babysitting services in their neighborhood if they need help." The conversation ended abruptly, followed by a call from Sarah herself 20 minutes later. Her voice carried a tone of injured bewilderment, as if I'd betrayed some fundamental family agreement. "Mom says you won't watch Emma and Jake this weekend. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. I just have other commitments now." "What kind of commitments? You never mentioned anything." The question revealed how completely they'd taken my availability for granted. The idea that I might have developed interests or obligations beyond their awareness seemed genuinely shocking to them. "I'm focusing more on my own life these days," I explained calmly. "Professional development, social activities, that sort of thing." Sarah's silence lasted long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, she spoke with a tone I'd never heard from her before. "You're being really selfish lately, Alina. Family is supposed to come first." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "Family should come first. I'm putting my own family first now." That conversation marked the end of their assumption that I existed primarily to support their convenience. They didn't understand the change, but they were beginning to recognize its reality. Over the following months, my new lifestyle took shape with surprising ease. The cruise was magnificent, a week of reading by the pool and exploring Caribbean islands without a single family crisis to interrupt. The extra income from increased savings and reduced family subsidies allowed me to upgrade my condo's furnishings and invest in quality items I'd postponed for years. Most importantly, I discovered what it felt like to make decisions based on my own priorities rather than everyone else's emergencies. The relief was profound, like setting down a heavy backpack I'd carried so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to walk without the weight. They assumed this was a temporary phase, a brief rebellion that would pass once I remembered my proper place in the family structure. They had no idea how permanent these changes actually were. 6 months into my new independent lifestyle, I was working a particularly busy Thursday evening shift in the cardiac unit when my phone buzzed with a call from Mom. I let it go to voicemail, focusing on my patient who needed medication adjustments before the night shift arrived. The voicemail was unusually frantic. "Alina, call me back immediately. We have a family emergency with Emma. Call me back right now." My stomach dropped as I imagined my 8-year-old niece injured or seriously ill. Despite my new boundaries, Emma and Jake were innocent children who didn't deserve to suffer because of adult conflicts. I called back during my break, expecting to hear about a playground accident or sudden illness. "Thank God," Mom answered before I could speak. "Emma needs surgery for a deviated septum. She can barely breathe at night, and the doctor says it's affecting her sleep and development. The problem is that Brandon lost his job 2 weeks ago, and their insurance won't cover the full cost." I felt a familiar sinking sensation, the recognition of a family financial crisis being transformed into my personal responsibility. But something was different this time. Instead of immediately calculating how much I could contribute, I found myself asking practical questions. "What's the total cost after insurance?" $18,000! "But that's not the worst part," Mom continued, her voice taking on the particular tone she used when building toward a request. Sarah and Brandon have been struggling financially even before Brandon lost his job. They're behind on mortgage payments and their credit cards are maxed out dealing with his unemployment. How much do you and Dad have available to help? The pause that followed was telling. Well, that's complicated. We've been helping them quite a bit over the past few years, and our savings aren't what they used to be. What does that mean specifically? Another pause. We have about $12,000 we could access, but that would leave us with almost nothing for our own emergencies. I felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Mom, how much have you and Dad given to Sarah and Brandon over the past few years? I don't think that's relevant to Emma's current medical needs, she replied defensively. I think it's extremely relevant. If I'm going to help with a family financial crisis, I need to understand how we got into this situation. The conversation that followed revealed financial dynamics I'd suspected but never confirmed. Over the past 3 years, my parents had provided approximately $58,000 in direct support to Sarah's family. The house down payment car loan co-signing monthly grocery subsidies, utility assistance during tight months, and several smaller emergencies that always seemed to occur right when Brandon was between jobs or Sarah was feeling overwhelmed. But the most shocking revelation was that none of these loans had ever been repaid. They weren't structured as gifts, but they weren't being treated as actual loans either. Sarah and Brandon had apparently developed a pattern of financial crisis, parental rescue, brief stability, and then another crisis. So you're telling me that you've given them almost $60,000 over 3 years, they've repaid nothing, and now you want me to contribute $18,000 more? I asked, feeling my professional training in logical assessment taking over. This is about Emma's health, not about keeping score, Mom replied, but her tone suggested she was beginning to realize how the situation sounded when stated plainly. I need to see their complete financial picture before I commit to anything. Bank statements, credit card balances, mortgage status, Brandon's unemployment benefits, everything. That's private family information, Alina. We don't ask each other for that level of detail. Then I can't help. If you want my money, you get my standards for financial transparency. The call ended with Mom promising to discuss the situation with Sarah and Brandon. I returned to my shift with a clear head, knowing that my boundaries were about to be tested in ways I hadn't anticipated. 2 hours later, Sarah called directly. I can't believe you're making Emma's surgery about money and paperwork, she began without preamble. She's your niece, and she's suffering. I'm not making it about paperwork. I'm making it about honesty. If you want my help, I need to understand exactly how much debt you're carrying and what your actual financial situation looks like. So, that's none of your business. Family helps family without conditions. Family also doesn't lie to each other about money. How much do you and Brandon actually owe in total? Sarah's silence stretched long enough that I could hear Emma and Jake playing in the background, their voices a painful reminder of what was at stake. The surgery is scheduled for 3 weeks from now, Sarah finally said. If we don't have the money, they'll postpone it indefinitely. Emma will keep struggling to breathe while you worry about bank statements. Wait, the surgery can be rescheduled if you find alternative funding. Children's hospitals have financial assistance programs, payment plans, charity care options. Have you applied for any of those? We shouldn't have to apply for charity when we have family who could help. You shouldn't have to apply for charity if your family hadn't already received $60,000 in help over 3 years without repaying any of it. That statement hung in the air between us the first time anyone had quantified the scope of financial support they'd received and failed to return. I'm not going to let Emma suffer because you've decided to become selfish and heartless, Sarah said, her voice trembling with anger. I'm not heartless. I'm responsible. There's a difference. She ended the call abruptly, but I knew this was far from over. Family financial emergencies had a way of escalating until someone gave in to pressure, and I was clearly being positioned as the someone who was supposed to cave. That evening, I called Jennifer to discuss the situation with someone who could provide an outside perspective. Wafak, So they've received almost $60,000 in 3 years and never repaid anything, she asked, confirming she'd heard correctly. Correct. And now they want 18,000 more, but they won't show me their actual financial situation. Alina, that's not family helping family. That's family enabling financial irresponsibility. You're being smart to ask for transparency. Jennifer's validation helped clarify my thinking. This wasn't about Emma's medical needs, which could be addressed through proper channels. This was about whether I would join the pattern of rescuing Sarah and Brandon from consequences of their financial choices. The next morning, I made an appointment with David Chen, a financial advisor who specialized in family financial planning. If I was going to navigate this situation wisely, I needed professional guidance about the long-term implications of various choices. David's assessment was sobering. If you contribute $18,000 without any changes to their spending patterns or accountability measures, you'll likely be facing similar requests within 6 to 12 months. People who develop dependency patterns don't break them just because they receive more money. Armed with professional advice and a clear understanding of the financial dynamics involved, I prepared for what I knew would be an increasingly intense campaign to change my mind. The campaign began that weekend with a family meeting called Without My Knowledge, where my parents and Sarah's family strategized about bringing me back into compliance with their expectations. I learned about this meeting later, but I could feel its effects immediately in the shift toward more coordinated pressure. The real emergency I was beginning to understand wasn't Emma's surgery. It was my refusal to automatically fund solutions to problems created by years of financial enabling. Monday morning brought a call from Dad, which immediately put me on alert since he typically left family financial discussions to Mom. Alina, I think we need to sit down and discuss this situation like adults. He began, his voice carrying the tone he used for serious mechanical problems that required systematic solutions. I agree completely. When would you like to meet? How about Sunday after church? We could have lunch and go through everything together. I appreciated his reasonable approach, but I wasn't naive about what going through everything might actually entail. That sounds good, Dad. I'll bring my questions and financial calculator. Sunday arrived with unusually warm October weather. I drove to my parents' house with a notebook full of questions and a recording app ready on my phone, knowing that financial discussions had a way of being remembered differently by different parties later. The lunch was surprisingly pleasant, with Dad asking genuine questions about my work and Mom actually listening to my responses without immediately shifting focus to Sarah's family. But I recognized the calm before the storm. Now then, Dad said as Mom cleared the dishes, let's talk about this situation with Emma's surgery. Before we start, I need to record this conversation, I said, placing my phone on the table. Financial discussions should be documented so there's no confusion later about what was discussed or agreed upon. Mom and Dad exchanged a look that suggested they hadn't expected this level of formality, but Dad nodded agreement. I've prepared some questions that need to be answered before I can make any informed decisions about helping. I continued, opening my notebook. The first one is about the total amount you've provided to Sarah and Brandon over the past 3 years. We told you about $12,000 available now, Mom began. That's not what I asked. I asked about the total amount you've given them historically. Dad cleared his throat. Well, there was the house down payment, which was $25,000. The car co-signing, though, that's not exactly giving money. But if Brandon defaults, you're responsible for the payments. What's the remaining balance on that loan? About $14,000. I wrote down the numbers as they slowly, reluctantly provided a complete financial picture. The house down payment, monthly grocery subsidies averaging $300, utility payments during emergency months, credit card payments when Brandon was between jobs, car repairs that somehow always exceeded their budget, Christmas and birthday money that had increased dramatically since Emma and Jake were born. When we finished calculating, the total came to $62,000 over 3 years, with no repayment plan and no accountability measures for how the money was being spent. Now I need to understand their current debt situation, I continued. That's really their private business, Mom said, shifting uncomfortably. Not if they want my money, it isn't. I need to see bank statements, credit card balances, mortgage status, and Brandon's job search documentation. You're treating this like a bank loan instead of family help, Dad protested. Dad, banks have lending standards because they work. They prevent people from borrowing money they can't repay for expenses they can't afford. Maybe families should have similar standards. The conversation paused while they processed this perspective, which was apparently new to them. What if we structured this as a loan with a repayment plan? Dad suggested. I'd consider that, but only with complete financial transparency and a realistic assessment of their ability to repay, which brings me back to needing their actual financial information. Mom left to call Sarah, and I could hear portions of an increasingly heated discussion in the kitchen. When she returned, her expression was tense. Sarah says their financial situation is none of your business and that family members should help each other without conditions. So then, family members should also be honest with each other about money. If their situation is too private to discuss, then it's too private for me to fund. Dad tried a different approach. What if we could guarantee the loan repayment ourselves? This question led to a revelation that shocked me more than anything we discussed so far. Dad, how exactly would you guarantee an $18,000 loan? Do you have that money available beyond the $12,000 you mentioned? The silence that followed was answer enough, but Dad eventually explained their actual financial situation. They'd already borrowed against their house to help Sarah with previous emergencies. Their retirement savings had been depleted to approximately $15,000. The $12,000 they could access for Emma's surgery represented almost everything they had left. You're telling me that you've mortgaged your retirement to support Sarah's lifestyle, and now you want me to prevent you from using your last savings on her daughter's surgery? When you put it that way, it sounds terrible, Mom said quietly. Oh, it is terrible. You've enabled them into a pattern of financial dependency that's threatening your own security. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus, who I knew would provide a healthcare perspective on the situation. Marcus, I'm with my family discussing my niece's surgery costs. As a cardiac nurse, what would you tell a family facing $18,000 in medical bills? First question is whether they've applied for financial hardship assistance through the hospital. Most pediatric facilities have programs specifically designed for situations like this. I put the phone on speaker so my parents could hear his advice. Second thing is payment plans. Hospitals would rather collect something over time than nothing immediately. Third option is medical credit programs with 0% interest if you qualify. Have you explored any of these options? I asked my parents. Sarah said she wanted to keep this within the family, Mom replied. Sarah wants to keep this within the family because it's easier than filling out paperwork and being accountable to institutions with actual lending standards. Marcus continued. The other thing I'd say is that medical emergencies reveal underlying financial problems. If a family can't handle an $18,000 expense, there are usually deeper budgeting issues that need to be addressed. After Marcus hung up, we sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Dad spoke. What are you proposing we do? I'm proposing that I pay Emma's surgery costs directly to the hospital but with conditions. Sarah and Brandon meet with a financial counselor. They provide complete transparency about their debts and spending. They create a realistic plan for repaying the money you've already given them, and you stop providing monthly subsidies that enable their poor financial management. Sarah will never agree to those conditions, Mom said immediately. Then Sarah doesn't actually want help with Emma's surgery. She wants another consequence-free bailout that lets her continue making irresponsible financial decisions. The meeting ended with my parents agreeing to present my proposal to Sarah and Brandon. I drove home knowing that the real test was coming, and it wouldn't be about Emma's medical needs. It would be about whether my family preferred enabling dysfunction over accepting accountability. That evening, Sarah called me directly, and her tone suggested the answer to that question. I cannot believe you're putting conditions on helping your own niece. What kind of person are you? I'm the kind of person who's watched you receive $60,000 over 3 years without repaying any of it. I'm the kind of person who doesn't want to enable financial irresponsibility anymore. This isn't about money. This is about Emma's health. If this was really about Emma's health, you'd have applied for hospital financial assistance, explored payment plans, and looked into medical credit programs. Instead, you went straight to demanding family money without any accountability. I'm not providing you with our personal financial information so you can judge our spending. Then you're not getting my money. It's that simple. The call ended with Sarah promising that I'd regret my heartless treatment of family in crisis. But I was beginning to understand that the real crisis wasn't Emma's surgery. It was the family's reaction to someone finally refusing to enable their dysfunction. The coordinated pressure campaign began the next morning with a call from Mom at 7 a.m., just as I was getting ready for my early shift. Alina, I barely slept last night thinking about Emma struggling to breathe while we argue about money. She began, her voice heavy with guilt and exhaustion. Mom, Emma's surgery can be scheduled once you find appropriate funding through proper channels. This isn't an emergency that requires panic decisions. How can you say that she's your niece and she's suffering? Before I could respond, she'd hung up. 20 minutes later, Dad called with a different approach. Your mother is devastated by your attitude toward family. I've never seen her this upset. I'm sorry she's upset, but I'm not responsible for managing her emotions about financial decisions. You're responsible for being part of this family, which means helping when help is needed. I am helping by refusing to enable destructive patterns that are threatening everyone's financial security. These calls continued throughout the week, with different family members taking turns expressing disappointment, concern, and increasingly direct criticism of my character. Aunt Patricia from Mom's side called to share her opinion about family loyalty. Uncle Robert from Dad's side left a voicemail about the importance of putting children first. Even my cousin Michelle, who lived 3 states away and had minimal contact with our family, somehow felt compelled to text me about the situation. But the most troubling development was Sarah's social media campaign. Her Facebook posts began featuring Emma looking tired and congested, with captions about the challenges of parenting a child with breathing difficulties. The posts never mentioned the family financial conflict directly, but they painted a picture of a struggling single mother doing her best with limited resources. Some people have money sitting in bank accounts while children suffer. Read one particularly pointed post. I guess we know where people's priorities really are. Jennifer called me Thursday evening after seeing these posts in her social media feed. Alina, I think you should know that Sarah's posting about this situation online. She's not naming you specifically, but anyone who knows your family will understand what she's talking about. The social media manipulation was troubling enough, but the workplace harassment escalated beyond what I'd expected. My parents began calling the hospital during my shifts, asking for me to be pulled away for family emergencies. When I explained that these weren't actual emergencies, they started calling back, demanding to speak with supervisors about my lack of family responsibility. Dr. Torres called me into her office Friday afternoon with a concerned expression. Alina, I've received several calls this week from people claiming to be your family members. They seem to think I can influence your personal financial decisions. I apologize for them contacting you here. There's a family disagreement about money, and they're escalating inappropriately. Are you facing some kind of family financial abuse situation? Because we have resources available if you need support. Her question was enlightening. From a professional healthcare perspective, persistent pressure to provide money accompanied by workplace harassment looked exactly like financial abuse. I'm handling the situation, but thank you for asking. I'll make sure they understand that work contacts are inappropriate. That weekend brought the most manipulative tactic yet. Saturday morning, Sarah arrived at my condo with Emma and Jake, using her children as emotional weapons in ways that crossed every line of appropriateness. Aunt Alina, why won't you help me breathe better? Emma asked her 8-year-old voice, carrying confusion about adult conflicts she couldn't possibly understand. Mommy says you have money to help, but you don't want to, Jake added with 6-year-old directness. I knelt down to their level, speaking gently while fury built in my chest about how they were being used. Emma, your breathing problem can be fixed, and it will be fixed. There are special programs at hospitals that help children get the surgery they need. But Mommy says we need you to help us. Your mommy and daddy are working on finding the best way to get you the help you need. That's their job as your parents. Sarah stood behind them with tears in her eyes, playing the part of desperate mother for maximum emotional impact. I can't believe you're going to look at Emma's face and tell her that money is more important than her health, she said. I'm going to look at Emma's face and tell her that her parents are responsible for finding appropriate solutions to her medical needs. Using children to manipulate family members is inappropriate and harmful to the children. After they left, I called Jennifer again, needing perspective from someone outside the family dynamics. They brought the kids to guilt trip you, she asked, her voice incredulous. Emma asked me directly why I won't help her breathe better. Sarah coached that child to ask me that question. Alina, that's emotional abuse. Using children as weapons in financial conflicts is a form of manipulation that can seriously damage those kids. Jennifer's perspective helped me recognize that this situation had moved beyond family financial disagreements into territory that was actively harmful to everyone involved, especially Emma and Jake. That evening, Marcus came over to help me think through the situation from a healthcare professional's standpoint. The thing that bothers me most, he said as we reviewed what had been happening, is that they're prolonging Emma's suffering to maintain pressure on you. If they really wanted her surgery as quickly as possible, they'd have applied for financial assistance weeks ago. You think they're using her medical needs strategically? I think they're more invested in getting money from you than they are in solving Emma's problem efficiently. Otherwise, they'd have explored every other option first instead of spending weeks pressuring family. Marcus helped me research financial assistance programs available through the Children's Hospital where Emma's surgery was scheduled. The application process was straightforward, required documentation of income and expenses, and typically provided decisions within 2 weeks. Families in Sarah and Brandon's situation frequently qualified for significant reductions in medical bills. Why wouldn't they apply for assistance that could reduce the bill to a few $1,000s instead of fighting for weeks trying to get $18,000 from family? I asked. Because assistance programs require financial transparency and accountability. Family pressure doesn't. Monday brought a new escalation when I received a call from my supervisor about a complaint filed against me by someone claiming to be my mother. Mahit, the caller said you're financially abusing elderly parents by refusing to help with medical bills, my supervisor explained. Obviously, we don't get involved in personal financial matters, but I wanted you to be aware that someone is making these claims. I realized that the family pressure campaign was now threatening my professional reputation. That afternoon, I made an appointment with James Mitchell, an attorney who specialized in family harassment cases. The pattern you're describing constitutes systematic harassment, he explained after reviewing my documentation. Workplace interference, social media manipulation, using children as emotional weapons, false claims of abuse. These are all serious issues. What are my options? Cease and desist letters, restraining orders if the behavior continues, and potentially defamation claims if false statements damage your reputation. I left his office with a clear plan for protecting myself while maintaining boundaries around financial responsibility. The family siege was about to discover that their tactics had legal consequences they hadn't considered. Tuesday evening brought what I hoped would be the final escalation when all 3 generations of family members arrived at my condo for an intervention about my selfishness and lack of family loyalty. Standing in my living room, faced with their unified disappointment and anger, I felt something crystallize that had been building for weeks. You want to talk about family loyalty? I asked, my voice calm despite my racing heart. Let's talk about the loyalty of parents who spent my childhood prioritizing one daughter over the other. Let's discuss the loyalty of a sister who's taken $60,000 without repaying any of it. Let's examine the loyalty of family members who call my workplace to file false complaints about my character. This isn't about the past, Mom said. This is about Emma's immediate need for surgery. This is entirely about the past. Emma's surgery could have been arranged weeks ago through proper channels. Instead, you've spent weeks trying to manipulate me into funding another bailout that lets Sarah and Brandon avoid consequences for their financial irresponsibility. We're your family, Sarah said, her voice breaking. How can you turn your back on family when we need you? I'm not turning my back on family. I'm refusing to enable dysfunction. There's a difference. The intervention ended with threats about inheritance predictions that I'd regret my selfishness when they were gone, and promises that Emma would always remember which aunt failed her in her time of need. After they left, I sat in the quiet of my condo and realized that their threats carried no power over me anymore. They'd already shown me exactly how much my well-being mattered to them. Now they were discovering how much their approval mattered to me. The answer was less than they'd expected. Wednesday morning brought an escalation I hadn't anticipated even after weeks of increasing harassment. A certified letter arrived at my condo from Peterson and Associates Attorneys at Law containing a formal demand that I provide financial support for my parents' elder care expenses and threatening legal action for financial elder abuse if I failed to comply within 10 days. I stared at the letter, genuinely stunned by the audacity of hiring an attorney to demand money they had no legal right to claim. The document was professionally formatted but legally baseless, designed to intimidate rather than pursue actual litigation. My first call was to James Mitchell, who reviewed the letter and immediately identified it as an intimidation tactic. They've hired a lawyer using borrowed money to threaten you into giving them more money, he said with a tone suggesting he'd seen similar patterns before. This is escalation born of desperation. Can they actually sue me for not giving them money? Absolutely not. Adult children have no legal obligation to provide financial support to parents who have assets and income. This is a bluff designed to scare you into compliance. Thursday brought the second nuclear weapon inheritance manipulation. Mom called to inform me that they were updating their wills to remove me entirely, leaving everything to Emma and Jake instead. Since you've made it clear that family means nothing to you, we're making sure our assets go to grandchildren who will appreciate family values, she announced with satisfaction. That's your choice to make, I replied, feeling oddly relieved rather than threatened. You're not even upset. Don't you care about losing your inheritance? Mom, you've taught me very clearly that I can't rely on family for financial support. Why would I plan my future around an inheritance that was always conditional on my compliance with your demands? The silence that followed suggested she hadn't expected my indifference to inheritance manipulation. The threats only had power if I wanted what they were threatening to withhold. Friday's escalation moved into territory that genuinely endangered my career. Sarah contacted my hospital's administration, claiming I'd stolen money from elderly parents and demanding investigation into my character and trustworthiness as a healthcare professional. Dr. Torres called me into her office with a serious expression that made my stomach drop. Alina, I need to inform you that we've received a formal complaint alleging financial misconduct involving your family members. While we don't believe these allegations have merit, I'm required to document them and ask for your response. The complainant is my sister, who's angry that I won't give her money for her daughter's medical bills. This is retaliation for my refusal to fund their financial irresponsibility. Can you provide documentation of the actual situation, because the allegations are serious enough that I need to protect both you and the hospital? I spent my lunch break creating a comprehensive file of evidence-recorded conversations, revealing the family's financial situation documentation of their $60,000 debt to my parents, copies of the harassment timeline, and records of my attempts to suggest legitimate assistance programs for Emma's surgery. Dr. Torres reviewed everything carefully before speaking. This appears to be systematic harassment designed to pressure you into providing money. I'm documenting this as a false complaint motivated by family financial disputes. However, I'm also recommending that you consider legal action to stop this harassment before it escalates further. That afternoon, I met with James Mitchell to discuss protective legal measures. The false complaint to your employer crosses a line into potential defamation territory, he explained. We should send a cease and desist letter immediately and prepare for possible legal action if the harassment continues. Oh, what about Emma's surgery? I don't want my niece to suffer because of this conflict. Have they actually applied for hospital financial assistance? I don't think so. They seem more focused on pressuring me than exploring other options. James suggested an approach that hadn't occurred to me: direct contact with the hospital's financial counseling office to discuss Emma's situation confidentially. Monday morning, I called the Children's Hospital and spoke with Linda Harrison, a financial counselor who specialized in surgical cases. I'm calling about my niece, Emma Thompson, who's scheduled for deviated septum surgery. Her parents are struggling with the costs, but they haven't applied for assistance. Can I get information about what programs might be available? Let me check her case file, Linda said. After a brief hold, she returned with surprising news. Actually, Emma's case was referred to our charity care program 3 weeks ago when her parents met with their surgeon. They should have received application materials by now. They received application materials 3 weeks ago. Both. Yes, and the program covers most surgical costs for families meeting income requirements. Has the family not submitted their application? I felt pieces clicking into place with disturbing clarity. Sarah and Brandon had known about available financial assistance for 3 weeks, but hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Instead, they'd spent those weeks orchestrating family pressure campaigns, legal threats, and workplace harassment. What information would they need to provide to complete the application? I asked. Income documentation, expense records, bank statements, basically a clear picture of their financial situation to verify need. The same financial transparency they'd refused to provide to family members was required for legitimate assistance. They'd chosen weeks of manipulation over a simple application process because the manipulation let them avoid accountability for their spending patterns. That evening, Brandon made his most desperate play, yet he called my mortgage company claiming I'd committed fraud in obtaining my loan and demanding investigation into my financial activities. I discovered this when my mortgage representative called Tuesday morning to verify information and ask about concerns raised by a family member. What? Someone claiming to be your brother-in-law called to report suspicious activity on your account, she explained. Obviously, we can't discuss account details with unauthorized parties, but we're required to follow up on fraud reports. My brother-in-law is attempting to sabotage my credit as retaliation for refusing to give him money. This is harassment, not legitimate fraud concern. The representative documented the situation and assured me that my account showed no irregularities, but the incident clarified how far the family was willing to go to pressure compliance. Wednesday brought evidence of surveillance when Jennifer noticed a car parked outside my building with someone photographing visitors and deliveries. Alina, I think Sarah was taking pictures of your building when I arrived for dinner last night, she said. The car followed me for several blocks after I left. The surveillance felt like a violation that crossed from harassment into stalking territory. I contacted James Mitchell immediately to discuss escalation of legal protections. But workplace sabotage, credit interference, and surveillance are serious escalations, he said. We need restraining orders and need them immediately. Thursday evening, the family played what they clearly believed was their final card, a staged medical emergency designed to force reconciliation. Dad called from the emergency room, claiming Mom was having chest pains and asking for her daughter during this frightening time. I drove to the hospital immediately, genuinely terrified that my mother was seriously ill despite our conflicts. I found her in a private room with Dad at her bedside, both looking anxious but not particularly distressed. What's wrong? What happened? I asked. I've been having chest pains and anxiety attacks thinking about our family falling apart. Mom said, her voice weak, but her color normal. The attending physician entered as I was processing this information. Mrs. Peterson's tests show no cardiac issues, he reported. Blood work is normal. EKG is normal. Chest x-ray shows no problems. This appears to be anxiety-related chest discomfort. So there's no medical emergency, I asked. No medical emergency. Stress and anxiety can cause very real physical symptoms, but there's no immediate health danger. As understanding dawned, I felt anger and disappointment beyond anything I'd experienced in this entire conflict. You faked a medical emergency to manipulate me into coming here. It wasn't fake, Dad said defensively, as she really was having chest pains. Anxiety about not getting your way isn't a medical emergency. Using fake health crises to manipulate family members is cruel and wasteful of emergency medical resources. I left the hospital that night knowing there were no boundaries they wouldn't cross, no tactics they wouldn't use, and no amount of harm to relationships they wouldn't inflict to get compliance with their demands. The next morning, I signed paperwork for restraining orders and prepared to end this harassment campaign with legal consequences they clearly hadn't expected. Their desperation had revealed the complete scope of their selfishness, and my patience with family dysfunction had officially expired. The restraining orders were served on Friday afternoon, and the immediate silence that followed was almost eerie after weeks of constant harassment. No calls, no visits, no social media posts, no workplace interference. For the first time in months, I could focus entirely on my own life without managing family manipulation. 2 weeks later, Jennifer called with news that changed the entire dynamic of the situation. Alina, you need to know that Emma had her surgery yesterday and it went perfectly. Sarah posted about it on social media, thanking the Children's Hospital Charity Care Program for making it possible. I felt a rush of relief and vindication. So they did apply for financial assistance. Apparently, the program covered 90% of the costs. The family only had to pay $1,800, and the hospital arranged a payment plan for that amount. Emma's surgery had been completed for less than $2,000, while the family had spent weeks demanding $18,000 from me. The manipulation had been about maintaining their pattern of financial dependency, not about solving Emma's medical problem efficiently. But the revelations were just beginning. Over the following weeks, other consequences of the family's financial mismanagement began surfacing in ways they hadn't anticipated. Brandon's unemployment fraud was discovered when his under-the-table work income was reported by a former employer settling their own tax issues. The state demanded repayment of benefits plus penalties totaling nearly $8,000 they didn't have. Sarah's social media campaign backfired spectacularly when friends and neighbors who'd seen her posts about poverty began asking questions about her recent purchases. Photos of designer handbags, expensive restaurant meals, and costly children's activities contradicted her claims of financial desperation. The frivolous lawsuit threats destroyed my parents' credit score when the legal fees were charged to credit cards already near their limits. The attorney they'd hired demanded payment for services rendered, adding $3,000 in debt to their already precarious financial situation. Most significantly, the workplace harassment they'd initiated triggered an investigation by hospital administration that revealed their false claims. When the administration learned they'd filed knowingly false complaints about my professional conduct, they banned all family members from contacting me at work and threatened legal action for defamation. Meanwhile, my life was flourishing in ways I'd never imagined possible. The promotion to nursing supervisor at a different hospital came through with a significant salary increase and better benefits. Marcus and I had been dating seriously for 6 months, and his proposal came with an engagement ring and a promise of the family support I'd never had before. The financial security I'd built during my year of independence was substantial. Without family financial drains, I'd been able to increase my retirement savings by 40%, build an emergency fund covering 8 months of expenses, and even start a small investment portfolio. My condo was paid ahead of schedule, and I'd begun looking at vacation properties for the future. Professional fulfillment came through my new supervisor role, where I developed training programs for nurses dealing with family financial pressure. The workshop series became popular throughout the hospital system, with many healthcare workers sharing similar stories of family financial manipulation. But the most profound change was personal. Therapy with Dr. Amanda Foster had helped me understand that what I'd experienced was systematic emotional and financial abuse disguised as family loyalty. Learning about narcissistic family dynamics, generational patterns of favoritism, and financial enabling gave me language for experiences I'd never been able to articulate. You weren't responsible for fixing their financial problems, Dr. Foster explained during one particularly enlightening session. You were positioned as the family's emotional and financial caretaker so they could avoid facing consequences for their choices. The breakthrough came when I realized that my refusal to enable them had forced them to seek appropriate help for Emma's surgery. By maintaining boundaries, I'd actually facilitated a better outcome for my niece than giving them money would have achieved. 6 months after the restraining orders, my parents requested a meeting through James Mitchell's office. They'd completed court-ordered financial counseling and wanted to discuss rebuilding our relationship. The meeting took place in a neutral conference room with my attorney present. Mom and Dad looked older and more subdued than I'd ever seen them, but there was something different in their demeanor. "We want to apologize for how we handled the situation with Emma's surgery," Dad began. "The financial counselor helped us understand that we'd been enabling Sarah and Brandon instead of helping them. We also realized that we'd been unfair to you for most of your life," Mom added, her voice shaky but sincere. "The counselor made us look at our patterns of favoritism and how we treated you differently than Sarah." "What are you hoping to accomplish with this meeting?" I asked. "We're hoping to start rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms," Dad replied. "We're not asking for forgiveness immediately, but we're hoping you might consider allowing us to prove that we can change." The conversation that followed was more honest than any we'd ever had. They acknowledged the financial damage they'd done to their own retirement security. They admitted that Sarah and Brandon had been financially irresponsible and that their enabling had made the problems worse. Most importantly, they recognized that their treatment of me had been systematically unfair and emotionally damaging. "What about Sarah and Brandon?" I asked. "Sarah is in individual therapy and financial counseling. Brandon found stable employment and they're working on repaying their debts. They're not part of this meeting because we wanted to address our relationship with you separately from theirs." Over the following year, my parents gradually rebuilt trust through consistent actions rather than promises. They stopped providing financial subsidies to Sarah's family. They attended their own therapy sessions to address patterns of favoritism. They respected boundaries and never pressured me for money or support. Sarah's journey was more complicated. The consequences of her financial irresponsibility combined with the social embarrassment of the failed manipulation campaign forced her to make substantive changes. Financial counseling revealed spending patterns she hadn't recognized, and individual therapy helped her understand how her entitlement had damaged family relationships. Brandon's fraud case was resolved through repayment and community service. The experience of facing legal consequences for his choices marked the beginning of more responsible financial behavior. Emma and Jake mercifully recovered from the emotional manipulation they'd experienced. Emma's surgery was completely successful, and she was breathing easily for the first time in years. I maintained my aunt relationship with them through carefully structured interactions that didn't involve their parents' financial issues. Marcus and I were married the following spring in a small ceremony attended by the family I'd chosen, supportive friends, colleagues who'd become family, and my parents who'd earned their invitation through a year of changed behavior. Sarah and Brandon weren't invited, but I sent Emma and Jake special gifts and letters explaining that I loved them, even though their parents and I were working through some adult problems. The most meaningful part of our recovery was watching my parents develop a healthy relationship with financial boundaries. They rebuilt their retirement savings through careful budgeting and part-time work. They learned to say no to Sarah's requests for money while maintaining emotional support for their grandchildren. On our wedding day, Dad pulled me aside with tears in his eyes. I'm proud of you for standing up to us when we were wrong. You saved this family by refusing to enable our dysfunction. The life lesson that emerged from this painful experience was profound. True family love includes accountability. People who genuinely care about your well-being want you to make healthy choices, not enable their unhealthy ones. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in patterns that harm everyone involved. Walking away from family manipulation isn't abandonment. It's setting boundaries that force people to face reality. The strength to choose your own well-being over others' dysfunction isn't selfish. It's necessary for breaking generational patterns of abuse and enabling. Emma's breathing problems were solved through proper medical and financial channels, proving that emergencies have solutions that don't require sacrificing your financial security. Sarah and Brandon learned to manage their own responsibilities when family bailouts stopped being available. My parents discovered that they could have healthy relationships based on respect rather than financial control. I learned that being the reliable one doesn't mean accepting unreliable treatment. Being financially responsible doesn't obligate you to rescue people from consequences of their financial irresponsibility. Being loving doesn't mean accepting manipulation disguised as loyalty. Today, I work with families facing similar dynamics through my role in hospital administration and my community workshops on financial boundaries. Marcus and I are planning our own family, knowing that we'll model healthy financial relationships and emotional boundaries for our children. My relationship with my parents continues to heal because they chose accountability over entitlement. My relationship with Sarah remains limited because she's still learning those lessons. Emma and Jake know they have an aunt who loves them enough to demonstrate healthy family dynamics rather than enabling dysfunctional ones. The most powerful realization was that choosing yourself doesn't mean abandoning family. It means refusing to abandon yourself for family members who won't respect your value. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones who understand your worth the least. Real family celebrates your success without expecting payment for their support. Real family respects your boundaries without testing them constantly. Real family wants your happiness even when it doesn't benefit them directly. I found that family in Marcus and friends who became chosen siblings and colleagues who supported my growth, and eventually in parents who chose to change rather than lose me permanently. Standing up for yourself is never selfish when you're being treated selfishly. Your financial security matters just as much as anyone else's. Your emotional well-being deserves the same protection you'd offer others. The greatest gift you can give people you love is the refusal to enable their self-destructive behavior. Sometimes walking away is the only way to save yourself and potentially wake up those who've lost their way. Emma is breathing perfectly now, and I played a role in that healing by refusing to solve the problem in a way that would have damaged everyone involved. That's what real love looks like: solutions that help without harm, support without enabling care, without manipulation. The ending I found wasn't the one I'd expected, but it was the one that honored everyone's dignity and created space for genuine healing to occur. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between enabling someone you love and protecting your own well-being? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about how you navigated family financial pressure while maintaining healthy boundaries. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others who might be facing similar family dynamics. Subscribe to my channel for more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations, and don't forget to share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the power of financial boundaries in family relationships. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting others who are learning to choose their own well-being without guilt. Remember that you're worthy of respect and healthy relationships, even from family members who've forgotten how to provide them. Wishing you courage in your own journey toward healthy family dynamics and the wisdom to know when love requires saying no.